for this project, what you're going to be doing is making a multi-layer stencil, and you're going to experiment with both value with black and white and shades of gray, as well as with a monochromatic color scheme. And the way that a stencil works is that you have open spaces that allow ink to flow through, and you're going to be balancing your image as a symbol with a word, and create your work of art. And you can decide how you want to lay your word into the piece. The first thing that you want to do is decide on what your symbol is going to be. So for example, in this one, I chose a crow, and you can see that my stencils were for the outside shape. I had my darkest gray. Then my second layer, I went in with a slightly lighter gray, and then I accented with my lightest value to put highlights in the eye and a little bit of the feathers on top. And I outlined what my layers were going to be using tracing paper and then tracing it onto the cardstock so I could cut through. And you will be using an X-Acto blade and a mat to cut things out. So you'll use an X-Acto blade, you'll use a mat, okay? And I'm not going to show you the cutting on this, but I am going to show you the way that you will then put together your layers to create your painting. And we're going to be using a stencil brush. You can use cosmetic wedges, but in this case, we're going to use a stencil brush, which looks like this, and they have nice stiff edges, and they move in an up and down motion so that the paint goes down through the opening but not under the stencil because of the stiffness of the bristles in combination with the viscosity of the ink. So in this second stencil that I'm doing, I'm going to use this as my image. So I'll have three of my three different stencils. One is going to be for the line or the detail, which will be my darkest value. This is going to be my lighter value, so that will be value number 2. And then I will have a third one, which is going to be just the outside shape. And so I've cut those up so you can see. Here is the outside shape, which is going to be my mid value. Here is the light value, and then this will be my finishing stencil with the dark value. So I'm going to just jump right in and I will show you how to start. So I will first start doing it as a value painting with just black and white, which you've already worked with. In this case, rather than using tempera paint, which you used for painting your pumpkins in value scale, you're actually going to use an acrylic paint. And the thing about acrylic is that it has a thicker viscosity, which will allow it to go down into the areas that you want it to go without being so wet that it, number one, jeopardizes the integrity of your stencil, or number two, that it would be so loose that it would flow underneath. So viscosity is like the thickness of your material. And you can see that this right here is fairly thick. And because this is going to be my mid layer, I do want to mix up quite a significant amount of paint because I'm going to just be laying out flat layers for this one. You can experiment with gradients, but if you're doing that, then it becomes a little bit harder to balance your other layers. So I'm just going to mix this all in here. And you can hear that little, that is the sound you want. Okay, so the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to come right in here and I am going to put down my stencil, lay my brush on its side, and I'm going to just take a piece of tape to tape it in place so that it doesn't move, because there is a lot of motion that takes place when you are tapping down your image. So the first thing I want to do is line it, making sure that it's face up. So what I've done is to indicate which one is face up is I have written the value that they are on top. So I know this is my mid value. You always want to start from the center and then gradually work out. And why that is important is because you're going to have the most paint on your bristles when you first start out, and this allows you to gradually have some of that paint removed from the bristles as you're moving out to the outer edges. Now it is much better to do a lighter, less opaque layer first, and then let that dry and then apply a second layer, rather than get a lot of paint on the surface of your brush and try to apply it really thick the first time, because in doing that you're going to have excess paint on your bristles and it may go underneath and you're not going to get a nice clean edge. So I'm going directly up and down with this little bouncing motion. So I'm going up, down, up, down, up, down, and I can see that I need to recharge my brush. So I'm going to come in here, get more paint, and again I'm going to just start from the center and just sort of work out towards the edges. And that really does help you get a little bit, if you do have excess paint on the outside of your bristles, it's going to help remove that excess paint before you go to the outer edges, where it's going to be most important that you have a drier brush, so like more like a without any excess paint on the surface. So I'm just going to go through here. Sometimes this might take 2 times, occasionally 3, but the better you get this layer, the more flat and consistent the value will be on your page, and that will make the other layers stand out more. Okay, so that looks pretty good to me. So now what I'm going to do is pull this off, and so you're going to be able to see that there is going to be hopefully a nice sharp edge. So when you're taking your tape off, just be kind of careful, because you don't want to rip the surface of your paper. So the masking tape is fairly gentle with its adhesion, so it should work okay. So now I have my first layer, and that is my mid-tone, and I could touch it and it's still a little bit wet in the center. So while that's dry, I'm going to add a little bit more white to my layer here so that I can make my lightest value, because that's what I'm going to put on next. Okay. Now if you do go and clean your brush, so say you get adventurous and you want to try different colors, and you go to wash your brush in between doing your values, I would say dry your brush with a towel to ensure that your bristles have no water in them, because if there's any water in your bristles, what's going to happen is that will water down the paint and it will impact the viscosity and make it more loose, and there's a likelihood that it will go underneath your stencil marks. So again, I'm going to just take a little tape here, hold it in place. You can see that I've labeled it light value so that I know that that's which is the front, right? Especially with an image that looks a little bit similar on both sides, it's good to know, because even though it looks similar, there are differences. So I'm going to just start again in the middle and then just work out. Okay, so now I'm going to line up my final stencil. Measuring it up against the edge of the layer below it. You can put like little marks on your stencils as a registration mark, but I'm just sort of looking underneath. I'm seeing where my grays line up, and then I'm just moving it so that it registers in to meet this outer edge. So yeah, you gotta just figure out where that right place is. Okay. Once you have it, you want to then come in and again, once again, put down your tape to hold it in place. Come in and again, once again, put down your tape to hold it in place. And I'm going to hold that one in place. And now I've made my darker value. I also like clean my brush so I can make sure that it was going to be a nice contrast. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to take this and I'm going to place it on top as a block out stencil. So rather than adding detail to my main area, what I'm trying to do is block it out so that I can add tone to the surrounding area. And you'll notice that I've already mixed up my color here. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to roll out a little piece of tape here, and I am going to put it underneath. I'm going to line it up so that I can see that it is covering up my entire piece. Okay. Okay. So now once I have my color done, then I can take my stencil, block out stencil, and pull it up. Stencil brush. Okay. So now I have my stencil, I have my filled in background, and so my last part is going to be to let this dry, and this time I'm going to let it dry, and then I'm going to place this stencil on top, and then I'll put my word. And the reason why I'm going to put this back on top is because I'm going to have my word cut across the image like this, and so I don't want the word to go over the top of my stencil. So I'm going to just stop that and let it dry, and then I will record me doing that. To put on my word, what I'm first going to do is I'm going to put my block out stencil back on the front with a little rolled up thing of tape underneath to hold it in place. And then I'm going to position my text where I want it to go. So I want it sort of here in the center. So I'm going to use the outside edges to sort of align it so it is central. I'm also going to try and ensure that it's straight by looking down here at the bottom and making sure that this looks even. So go like that, because then with the checking these two places for registration, you'll be able to ensure that it is a bit more balanced in your composition. Dry paint on your bristles, like no excess, because their details are a little bit more finite. So you're going to just come in there and just do your daubing up and down to fill in your word. And again, 2 or 3 passes will ensure that you get nice opaque coverage. And again, just up and down. You're trying to make sure that it doesn't go under, and in order to ensure that it doesn't go under, you want to make sure that you're keeping your bristles so they're flat. So whatever word it is that you choose, we'll print it out on cardstock, and then you will use the X-Acto blade and remove the different parts of your font. There is one part that makes it a little bit challenging, is you definitely have to choose a font that allows for bridges in between each of the letters, because if I didn't have bridges, I wouldn't be able to show the whole letter. For example, with an O is very tricky, right? Because there's something isolated completely in the middle. So you need to choose a font that's going to create those bridges for you to allow for you to get nice coverage. So then you can go ahead, take it off, decide if you want to put it somewhere else. So maybe I want to come in here and do it a second time. But I can look at what it looks like first before I decide whether or not I want to put another copy of it down there. And you could make it go partially off the page, because the viewer will then infer like what the rest of the word is. So I could come in and put a little bit going off here and here and then go down to the bottom. Or I can just leave it as is. What I want to show you is a trick that you can do is if you want to create a highlight or a shadow on your word, you can take it slightly off register like this, so that you have a little bit of space showing, and then you line it back up, put it back down, and then you choose a different color to go over the